I didn't think twice about the skirt when I bought it. It was one of those impulsive late-night purchases, scrolling through my phone in bed while Ryan snored next to me. The model had this effortless confidence. Bare legs, oversized sweater tucked just enough into the waistband, messy hair that somehow still looked perfect. I remember thinking I used to look like that. Not exactly like her, but close enough that it didn't feel ridiculous. That was before marriage settled into routine, before I became someone who picked outfits based on errands instead of attention. The package sat unopened for 3 days on the kitchen counter. I walked past it every morning with my coffee, telling myself I'd return it. It wasn't really me anymore. At least that's what I'd convinced myself. But that Saturday afternoon, the house was quiet. Ryan had gone golfing with his coworkers, and I was cleaning out the closet, trying to convince myself I had control over something in my life. I found myself opening the package without really thinking about it. The fabric was softer than I expected. Black, simple, but short. Short enough that I actually hesitated holding it up against my body. I laughed under my breath, standing there in my underwear and an old college sweatshirt. "Who do you think you are?" I muttered. Still, I pulled it on, and for a second, just a second, I didn't hate what I saw in the mirror. My legs looked better than I remembered. Not perfect, but real, strong, alive. It had been a long time since I'd looked at myself and felt something other than neutrality. I turned sideways, adjusted the hem, tucked the sweatshirt slightly like I'd seen in the picture. It felt ridiculous and thrilling at the same time. I wasn't planning on anyone seeing me. That's the part I keep replaying. Because if I had thought for even 1 second that someone else would walk through that door, I never would have kept it on. But I didn't hear the front door open. I didn't hear footsteps. What I heard was a voice behind me, casual and completely unprepared for what it was about to see. "Aunt Claire?" I froze. Every muscle in my body locked as I slowly turned around, my heart already racing before my brain caught up. Ethan stood there, in the hallway, halfway between the living room and the kitchen. He had his car keys in one hand, his phone in the other, like he'd just walked in without thinking. Ryan's nephew, 19. Tall, athletic, that kind of quiet confidence that comes with being young and not yet worn down by life. He'd been staying with us for the summer while interning at some marketing firm downtown. I'd gotten used to having him around, but in the same way you get used to background noise. He was polite, respectful, always calling me Aunt Claire in that easy way that made me feel older than I actually was. But in that moment, the way he looked at me wasn't anything like that. His eyes dropped, just for a second, but I saw it, and he didn't hide it well enough.
"Oh, sorry," he said quickly, but he didn't move. "I didn't know you were wearing a miniskirt, standing there like I had no business standing, looking like someone I hadn't been in years." I crossed my arms instinctively, trying to pull the sweatshirt down, but it barely helped. "You're supposed to knock," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I did," he said, almost defensively. "You didn't answer." Of course I didn't. I'd been too busy pretending I was someone else. He shifted his weight, still standing there, still looking at me in a way that made my stomach twist in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. "I can go," he added, but there was hesitation in it. Not urgency, not embarrassment, something else. "It's fine," I said too quickly. "I was just trying something on." "Yeah," he said quietly. That single word hung in the air longer than it should have. I could feel heat rising up my neck. I turned slightly, grabbing a cardigan from the chair and pulling it around myself like it would somehow fix the situation. "You're home early?" I said, trying to steer things back to normal. "Meeting got canceled." Silence again. He hadn't moved. That's when I realized he was still watching me. Not in a creepy way, not aggressive, just focused, like he was seeing me differently for the first time. And that thought, God, that thought made something uncomfortable settle in my chest. "You need something?" I asked, forcing a small, tight smile. He blinked, like he snapped out of something. "No, I just left my charger here this morning. It's probably in the kitchen." "Yeah." But he didn't go. Instead, he leaned slightly against the doorway, arms crossing casually, like he'd suddenly gotten comfortable staying exactly where he was. "You don't usually dress like that," he said. It wasn't a question. I let out a short laugh, trying to brush it off. I don't usually have an audience either. Something in his expression shifted at that. Not guilt, not exactly. More like interest sharpening into something clearer. I didn't mean, he started. It's fine, Ethan. I cut him off, a little more firmly this time. Really. I turned away from him, pretending to adjust something on the dresser, mostly because I didn't trust what my face might be doing. This was ridiculous. He was a kid, Ryan's nephew. And yet, you look good, he said. Simple, direct, no hesitation. My breath caught before I could stop it. I stared at the dresser, my reflection just barely visible in the mirror. My eyes met my own, and I didn't recognize the expression staring back at me. Don't, I said quietly. I'm just saying, you shouldn't be saying anything. That came out harsher than I meant it to, but I didn't take it back. I finally turned to face him fully, arms crossed again, creating as much distance as I could without physically moving away. This isn't appropriate, I added. He held my gaze, unflinching. Okay, he said, but he didn't apologize.
He didn't look away, and that was the part that unsettled me the most, because it didn't feel like a mistake to him. It felt like a choice. I'm going to grab my charger, he said after a moment, pushing off the doorway. Please do. He walked past me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the faint scent of his cologne, something clean, sharp, too grown up for someone I still mentally categorized as a teenager. I held my breath until he disappeared into the kitchen. Only then did I exhale, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the hem of the skirt. What the hell was I doing? I pulled it off almost aggressively, like it had burned me, tossing it onto the bed. I stood there for a second, grounding myself, listening to the faint sounds of Ethan moving around in the kitchen. This shouldn't have been anything, just an awkward moment, just bad timing. But my chest felt tight, like something had shifted in a way I couldn't quite name. And worse, I couldn't ignore the fact that a small, quiet part of me had reacted to the way he looked at me. That part made me feel sick. I changed into jeans and a loose t-shirt, something safe, something invisible. By the time I walked into the kitchen, I had my composure back, or at least something close to it. Ethan was leaning against the counter, charger in hand, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I entered, and for a split second, I saw it again. That look. Gone just as quickly as it appeared. Found it, he said. Good. I busied myself with the sink, rinsing a mug that didn't need rinsing. You heading out again? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Yeah, meeting some friends. Okay. Another pause. You're not gonna wear it? He asked. I froze, slowly turned to face him. What? The skirt, he said, like it was the most normal question in the world. I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was joking. He wasn't. That would have landed, because he nodded this time, more seriously. Okay, he said, but again, no apology. He pushed off the counter, grabbing his keys. I'll be back later, he added. He walked toward the door, then paused, glancing back at me, and for just a second, I felt like I was standing in that bedroom again, exposed in a way that had nothing to do with clothing. You should wear it out sometime, he said quietly. Then he left. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at nothing, my heart beating just a little too fast. That should have been the end of it, a weird, uncomfortable moment that we'd both forget. But it wasn't, not even close, because something had changed in the way he looked at me, and worse, something had changed in the way I felt being looked at. I tried to convince myself it was nothing.
That whole afternoon, I stayed busy in the most deliberate way possible. Laundry, vacuuming, reorganizing the pantry like I suddenly cared about expiration dates. Anything that kept my mind from circling back to that moment in the bedroom. But it kept creeping in anyway. The way Ethan had paused instead of immediately leaving. The way his eyes lingered, just enough that it didn't feel accidental. And that comment, "You look good." It wasn't just what he said, it was how easily he said it, like he wasn't crossing any line at all. By the time Ryan got home, I had buried it well enough that I almost believed my own version of events. I was at the stove when he walked in, the familiar sound of his keys hitting the counter, his voice calling out a casual, "Hey, babe." I turned, forcing a smile. "Hey, how was golf?" "Hot, slow, same old." He leaned down to kiss me, quick and routine. I kissed him back, but my mind flickered, just for a second, to that other moment earlier. The contrast hit me before I could stop it. Ryan didn't notice. He never noticed things like that. We moved through the evening like we always did. Dinner, TV, half conversations about work. Ethan came back around 9, loud enough this time that there was no surprise entrance. "Hey," he said as he walked in. "Hey," Ryan answered from the couch without looking up. "How was your thing?" "Good." I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to, rinsing dishes slowly, listening to their voices blend together in the living room. Normal. Everything sounded normal. Until it didn't. "You still interning with that girl from your team?" Ryan asked casually. "Yeah? You ever gonna bring her around or what?" There was a pause. Not long, but noticeable. "Maybe," Ethan said. I don't know why I held my breath. It wasn't my business. None of it was. But for some reason I felt aware. Hyper-aware of him now, in a way I hadn't been before. Every shift in his tone, every pause, every word. I dried my hands and finally walked into the living room. Ethan glanced at me as I entered, just briefly, but it was enough to make something tighten low in my stomach. "Claire made dinner," Ryan said, gesturing lazily. "You eat already?" "Yeah, I grabbed something earlier." "Your loss." Ethan nodded, but his attention drifted again, back to me, just for a second longer than necessary. I sat down on the opposite end of the couch, putting physical space between us, like it mattered. It should have mattered. I told myself it did. But the room felt smaller than usual, the air thicker. At one point, Ryan got up to grab another beer, disappearing into the kitchen. It was barely 30 seconds, maybe less, but it was enough. "You changed," Ethan said quietly. My head snapped toward him. "What?" He leaned back slightly, relaxed, like we were having a normal conversation. "Earlier, you were wearing something else." My pulse spiked. "That's not a conversation we're having."
"I'm just saying..."
"No," I cut him off, sharper this time. "You're not just saying anything. You're pushing it." For the first time, he hesitated. Not backing down, just recalibrating. "I didn't mean anything weird by it," he said. I stared at him, searching his face. That wasn't entirely true, but it also wasn't entirely false. That's what made it complicated. Ryan's footsteps echoed from the kitchen, and just like that, the moment snapped back into place. Ethan looked away first this time, grabbing his phone, scrolling like nothing had happened. Ryan sat back down, completely oblivious. I barely heard the rest of the conversation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ryan was out within minutes, one arm thrown lazily across my waist. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the room dim except for the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. I kept replaying everything. Not just the bedroom, not just the kitchen, but every small interaction since Ethan moved in. The way he'd started lingering a little longer in conversations. The way he'd joke with me in a tone that was just slightly different than how he talked to Ryan. The way I had ignored it. Or maybe chosen not to see it. I turned slightly, careful not to wake Ryan, and stared at the edge of the bed. This was ridiculous. Dangerous, even. He was 19. I was married. And yet, that look in his eyes earlier didn't feel like something I imagined. And worse, I didn't hate it as much as I should have. That realization sat heavy in my chest. The next few days, I made a conscious effort to create distance. I stayed busier, ran errands I didn't need to run, took longer at the gym, even started working from a coffee shop instead of the house, just to avoid being alone there when Ethan might be around. It worked. Sort of. But avoidance has a way of making things louder in your head. Every time I did see him, it felt charged, like there was something unspoken sitting between us, waiting for either one of us to acknowledge it. We didn't. Not directly. But it showed up in smaller ways. A glance that lasted a second too long. A shift in tone. A quiet awareness that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. The house was quiet, which wasn't unusual. I dropped my bag by the door and headed upstairs, already pulling my hair out of its tie, ready to change into something comfortable. I didn't expect anyone to be there, so I didn't think about it. I walked into the bedroom, kicking off my shoes, and started unbuttoning my blouse as I moved toward the closet. "Hey," the voice hit me mid-motion. I froze. Ethan was sitting in the chair by the window, laptop open on his knees. I hadn't even seen him. "What are you doing in here?" I asked, quickly pulling my shirt closed again. "My room's Wi-Fi is acting up," he said. "This one's better." Of course it was. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. "You could have said something. You walked in pretty fast." That wasn't the point.
I grabbed a t-shirt from the closet, turning my back to him as I changed, more aware of his presence than I wanted to admit. "You could have knocked," I said. "I was already in here." I clenched my jaw slightly. This felt like a pattern. "You're not supposed to just hang out in our room, Ethan. I needed a quiet place to work. There's a whole house for that." "Not really," he said lightly. "Living room TV's always on, kitchen's loud. This is the only spot that's actually quiet." I turned around, now fully dressed, crossing my arms. "This is still our space." He looked up at me then, meeting my eyes in a way that made it hard to hold his gaze for too long. "I'll leave if you want," he said. There it was again, that same tone. Not defiant, not apologetic, just aware. I hesitated. That was my mistake, because hesitation said more than any words I could have chosen. "You can finish up," I said finally, even though every instinct told me that was the wrong answer. His lips curved slightly. Not a full smile, just enough. "Okay." I moved to the dresser, pretending to look for something, but I could feel it, the shift in the room, the quiet, the tension. "You've been avoiding me," he said after a moment. I let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "That's not true. It kind of is." I shook my head. "You're imagining things." "I don't think I am." I turned to face him again. "Why are you even paying that much attention?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. And the second it did, I regretted it, because it opened something. He closed his laptop slowly, setting it aside. And then he stood up. That alone changed everything, because now he wasn't sitting across the room. Now he was closer. Too close. "I don't know," he said, his voice quieter now. "Maybe because you're not what I thought you were." My stomach tightened. "What does that even mean?" "It means," he hesitated, like he was choosing his words carefully, "you don't act like someone who's just settled." That word hit harder than it should have. "Settled?" I repeated. "Yeah." I let out a breath, crossing my arms tighter. "You don't know anything about my life. I know what I see." "And what do you think you see?" He stepped just a little closer. Not enough to touch, enough to make it impossible to ignore. "I see someone who bought that skirt for a reason," he said. My pulse pounded in my ears. "That's none of your business." "Maybe not." Silence stretched between us. Heavy, uncomfortable, electric. "You should go," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. He didn't argue this time. He picked up his laptop, walking past me again, close enough that my breath caught for a split second. At the door, he paused. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said. Then he left, and I stood there in the middle of the room, completely still, my heart racing in a way I couldn't justify anymore, because this wasn't just awkward anymore.
It wasn't just inappropriate. It was something else now. Something that was starting to feel a lot harder to control. I should have shut it down right there. That moment in the bedroom, the way he stood too close, the way he said things that felt like they had weight behind them. I should have drawn a line so clear it couldn't be crossed again. But I didn't. And the worst part is, I knew I didn't. The next morning, I woke up with that same heavy awareness sitting in my chest. Ryan was already gone. Early meeting, he'd mumbled before leaving. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something was waiting. I stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at my phone, scrolling without actually seeing anything. My mind kept drifting back to Ethan. Not just what he'd said, but how easily he said it. Like he wasn't scared of the situation at all. Like he didn't see it as a situation. That difference mattered. Because I did. I knew exactly how wrong this was, how easily it could spiral into something that would wreck everything. My marriage, my life, the fragile sense of normal we'd built over the years. And yet, I hadn't told Ryan. That thought sat uncomfortably in the back of my mind. Why hadn't I? If it was as inappropriate as I knew it was, if Ethan had crossed a line, then the obvious thing would have been to say something. But I didn't, because saying it out loud would make it real. And maybe, if I was being honest with myself, I didn't want it to be real yet. Around noon, I finally forced myself out of bed and headed downstairs. I kept things slow, controlled. Coffee, emails, pretending like it was just another normal day. Ethan's door was closed. Good. I told myself that was good. I worked at the kitchen table for a couple hours, actually managing to focus for once. It felt like maybe things would settle on their own if I just didn't engage. Then I heard his door open upstairs. My body reacted before my brain did, shoulders tensing, fingers pausing mid-typing. Footsteps came down the stairs, steady, unhurried.
I didn't look up right away. "Morning," he said. It wasn't morning anymore, but his tone was casual, normal. I glanced up briefly. "Hey." He walked into the kitchen, grabbing a glass, filling it with water like nothing had changed, like yesterday hadn't happened. I almost felt relieved. Almost. "How's work?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "Fine." "That exciting, huh?" I gave a small, polite smile. "Something like that." He nodded, taking a sip of water, watching me over the rim of the glass. Not openly staring, but not avoiding it either. That awareness again. It was still there. "You busy today?" he asked. "A little." I went back to typing, hoping that would signal the end of the conversation. It didn't. "You always work from here?" he asked. "Sometimes." "Seems quiet." "It is." Another pause. "You like quiet?" I stopped typing.
Looked up at him. "What is this?" I asked. Not harsh, but not soft either. "What?" "This." I gestured vaguely between us. "Why are you asking me all these questions?" He shrugged slightly. "Just talking." "No, you're not just talking." That landed. I could see it in the way his expression shifted, just slightly more serious now. "Okay," he said. "Then what do you think I'm doing?" I held his gaze, searching for something clear. "I think you know exactly what you're doing," I said. A beat of silence. Then quietly, "Yeah, I probably do." My chest tightened. There it was. No pretending, no confusion, just honesty. "You need to stop," I said, my voice lower now, controlled. "Stop what?" "You know what." He pushed off the counter, walking a few steps closer. Not too close, but enough to shift the energy again. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "That's not true." "What am I doing then?" I stopped myself, frustrated. "You're crossing lines." "Am I?" he asked. "Yes." "How?" I stared at him, because the answer wasn't simple. He hadn't touched me, hadn't said anything explicitly wrong. Everything lived in that gray space. Tone, looks, implication, and somehow that made it worse. "You're not stupid," I said finally. "No?" "Then don't act like this is innocent." Another pause. Then he nodded, slow, deliberate. "Okay," he said. "It's not innocent." My stomach dropped. The air felt heavier instantly. "And you're still not stopping," I said. "No." That word hit harder than I expected. "Why?" I asked, before I could stop myself. He studied me for a second, like he was deciding how honest to be. "Because you're not either," he said. I felt that like a physical impact. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you tell him?" My breath caught. He didn't have to say Ryan's name. We both knew. "That's not your concern," I said quickly. "It kind of is." "No, it's not. It tells me everything I need to know." Anger flared, sharp and immediate. "You don't get to analyze my marriage." "I'm not analyzing your marriage," he said calmly. "I'm looking at you." That shut me up, because I didn't have a clean response to that. "Look," I said after a moment, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Whatever you think this is, it's not happening. It can't." "I didn't say it was happening." "Then what are you doing?" He took another step closer. Now it was too close. "I'm seeing how far you'll let it go," he said. My heart started pounding. "That's not a game you want to play." "Maybe not." "Ethan?" "You didn't shut it down," he interrupted. "Not really. I told you to stop, but you didn't mean it." "I did." "Then say it like you mean it." The words hung there, simple, direct, a challenge. I opened my mouth to respond, to shut this down the way I should have from the beginning. But nothing came out, and that silence, that hesitation, said everything. His eyes flickered, just slightly, like he caught it.
Like he knew. "Well, that's what I thought," he said quietly. I stepped back then, creating space, shaking my head. "This is insane," I muttered. "You need to leave." He held my gaze for another second. Then, finally, he nodded. "Okay." He grabbed his glass, set it in the sink, and walked out of the kitchen. Just like that. No argument, no pushback. And somehow that made it worse, because it didn't feel finished. It felt like something had just been confirmed. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the spot where he'd been standing. My hands were slightly shaky, my chest tight. Because he was right about one thing. I hadn't shut it down. Not completely. And I didn't know why. That night, things felt off. Ryan was in a good mood,
talking about some deal closing at work, pouring himself a drink, laughing at something on his phone. I sat next to him, nodding at the right moments, but I felt disconnected, like I was watching everything from a step outside myself. Ethan came home late again, quieter this time. He didn't say much, just a quick hey before heading upstairs. He didn't look at me, not once. And that should have been a relief. It should have made things easier. But instead, it left this strange, restless feeling sitting under my skin, like something unresolved, like something unfinished. Later that night, I went to get water. The house was dark, quiet. Ryan was already asleep. I moved carefully down the hallway, the soft hum of the fridge the only sound in the kitchen. I poured a glass of water, leaning against the counter, letting the cool air settle my thoughts. "You can't sleep either?" I froze. His voice came from behind me, lower, quieter than usual. I turned slowly. Ethan stood in the doorway, shirtless, sweatpants hanging low on his hips like he'd just gotten out of bed. This was new, this version of him. Not the kid I'd been ignoring, not the almost man from earlier. This was something else entirely. "I just came for water," I said. "Same." He walked in, moving past me to grab a glass. Closer than he needed to be. Again. I focused on my own glass, gripping it a little tighter than necessary. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds, just the sound of water pouring, then silence again. "You've been quiet tonight," he said. "So have you." "Yeah." He took a sip, leaning back against the counter across from me. We stood there, facing each other, the dim kitchen light casting shadows that made everything feel more intimate than it should have. "This has to stop," I said, quieter now. "I know, but you're not stopping. Neither are you." That again. I exhaled slowly. "I'm trying." "Are you?" "Yes." "Doesn't feel like it." My jaw tightened. "You don't get to decide that." "I can see it." "No, you think you can." Another pause. Then he said something that shifted everything. "You didn't put the skirt away." My breath hitched. "What?" "I saw it," he said. "Still on the bed earlier."
Heat rushed through me, immediate and uncontrollable. That doesn't mean anything. Doesn't it? No. Then why is it still out? I didn't answer, because I didn't have a good one, because I hadn't even thought about it until now, and suddenly that detail felt exposed, like proof of something I didn't want to admit. "You should go back to bed," I said, trying to regain control. He didn't move. Neither did I. The silence stretched again, heavier now. "You really don't want this to happen?" he asked quietly. My heart pounded. This isn't a question you should be asking, but I am. I swallowed. "Yes," I said finally. "I don't." He studied my face, like he was looking for cracks. "And you believe that?" he asked. That question lingered longer than anything else he'd said, because the answer wasn't as immediate as it should have been. And he saw that. Of course he did. That was the problem. He was seeing too much. I should have walked away. That moment in the kitchen, late, quiet, too close. I should have ended it right there. Said something definitive, created distance that couldn't be undone. But I didn't. And I think, deep down, that's the part that scares me the most. Not what almost happened, not even what did happen later. It's the fact that I stood there, knowing exactly where things were heading, and didn't stop it. After he asked me that question, "And you believe that?" everything felt suspended, like time slowed just enough for me to understand the weight of what was happening. "I do," I said finally, but it didn't sound convincing, not even to me. Ethan watched me for another second, like he was measuring the truth in my voice. Then he nodded, slow, almost like he'd expected that answer. "Okay," he said quietly. And just like that, he pushed off the counter and walked past me. No lingering, no pushing, no argument. He left me standing there alone in the kitchen, my heart racing, my hands still wrapped around that glass of water like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed everything. His voice, his expressions, the way he stood too close without touching me. It was like my brain was trying to process something it didn't want to fully admit.
By morning, I felt exhausted, not just physically, mentally, emotionally, like I'd been holding something heavy for too long. Ryan left early again, barely noticing anything was off. A quick kiss, a distracted "see you later," and he was gone. And then it was just me, and the quiet. I stayed upstairs longer than usual, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. The skirt was still exactly where I'd left it. That shouldn't have mattered, but it did, because now it felt like more than just clothing. It felt like a choice I hadn't fully made yet. I stood up slowly, walked over, and picked it up. The fabric felt different this time. Not exciting, not new, heavy.
I folded it carefully, more carefully than necessary, and opened the drawer. Paused. For a second, I almost put it back on the bed. I don't know why, but I didn't. I slid it into the drawer and closed it. That should have felt like resolution. It didn't. Around noon, I heard movement downstairs. Ethan. My chest tightened immediately. I told myself to stay upstairs, give it space, let things cool down. But something pulled me down anyway. Habit, maybe, or something else I didn't want to name. I found him in the kitchen again, same as yesterday, phone in hand, leaning against the counter like he belonged there. He looked up when I walked in. And for the first time in days, there was nothing. No lingering look, no tension, no shift. Just normal. "Hey," he said. "Hey." I moved to the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water, hyper-aware of the silence between us. It felt different now. Quieter, but not in a good way. More like something had been shut off. "You heading out today?" I asked, mostly just to fill the space. "Yeah, later." "Okay." Another pause. I waited for something, anything, to surface. It didn't. He went back to his phone. I stood there for another few seconds, then nodded to myself and walked out of the kitchen. And that should have been it. That should have been the reset, the clean break. But it wasn't. Because that distance, that sudden normalcy, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like absence. And I hated that I noticed. The rest of the day dragged. I couldn't focus, couldn't settle into anything. My thoughts kept circling back, not to what he said or did, but to what he wasn't doing now. He wasn't looking at me, wasn't pushing, wasn't testing boundaries. He'd stopped, and somehow that left me more unsettled than before. By evening, Ryan came home in a rush of energy, talking, moving, filling the house with noise again. Ethan stayed mostly upstairs. The distance held. Dinner was normal. Too normal. I caught myself glancing toward the stairs more than once, like I was waiting for him to come down. He didn't. Later that night, Ryan fell asleep on the couch, TV still on, half-finished drink on the table. I turned it off, cleaned up quietly, and stood there for a moment in the dim light of the living room. Everything looked the same. Nothing had changed. Except me. I knew that. I felt it. I walked upstairs slowly, each step heavier than it should have been. The hallway was dark. Ethan's door was closed. I paused outside it. Just for a second. That was all it took. 1 second of hesitation. 1 second of thinking about everything that had happened over the past few days. And then I kept walking. Went into my room. Closed the door. That should have been the end of it. But around midnight, I woke up again. Restless, wide awake. The house was silent. I stared at the ceiling for a while, trying to force myself back to sleep. It didn't work. Eventually, I got up. I told myself I was just getting water again. Same excuse.
Same quiet footsteps down the hallway. But this time, I didn't go to the kitchen right away. I stopped, right outside his door. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. This was a choice, a clear one. No confusion, no gray area. I knew exactly what I was doing. And for a long second, I just stood there, thinking, knowing. And then I knocked. Soft, almost quiet enough to pretend I hadn't. There was a pause, then movement. The door opened. Ethan stood there, shirtless again, eyes slightly unfocused from sleep. But the second he saw me, something sharpened, something aware.
We didn't speak right away. We just looked at each other. And everything that hadn't been said over the past few days filled that silence. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I could have said yes. I could have said no. I could have said anything that would have ended this right there. But I didn't. "I couldn't sleep," I said. That wasn't the truth, not the full truth, but it was enough. He held my gaze for another second, then stepped back, just enough to leave space in the doorway. An invitation, not spoken, not forced, just there. And that was the moment, the exact moment where everything could have gone one way or the other, where I could have turned around, walked back to my room, closed the door, and buried this entire thing as a mistake that never fully happened. Or I could step forward. I knew that. I felt that. And I still made the choice. I stepped inside. The door closed quietly behind me. No rush, no urgency, just a quiet, deliberate click. And the second it did, something shifted permanently. We didn't touch right away. That's what people get wrong about moments like this. It's not immediate. It's not sudden. It's slow, heavy, filled with everything that led up to it. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice lower now. "I know." But I didn't move. Neither did he. "You can still go back," he added. I nodded slightly, but my feet stayed exactly where they were. Another silence, thicker than anything before. "Why didn't you stop me?" I asked. His eyes held mine. "Because you didn't want me to." That hit something deep, because it was true, in a way I couldn't deny anymore. Every step, every pause, every hesitation over the past few days, they all led here. I exhaled slowly, my chest tight with something I couldn't fully name. "This changes everything," I said. "Yeah." But neither of us moved toward the door. Neither of us ended it. And that was the answer. Not in words, not in actions yet, but in the fact that we both stayed, that we both let the silence stretch without breaking it. Because once you cross a line like that, even before anything actually happens, there's no going back to what things were before. And standing there, in that room, in that quiet moment where everything felt suspended between right and wrong, I knew one thing for certain. I had already gone too far, long before I ever knocked on that door.